Over his full decade and a half composing for the programme, Murray Gold became well known to Doctor Who fans with his memorable themes for characters and monsters alike. By comparison, Segun Akinola, who took over in Series 11, has made far less of an impression, and it's easy to point to that with scrutiny. However, the success of a soundtrack is not necessarily defined by how memorable it is, quite the opposite in fact. While there has been no shortage of criticism directed at Series 11 and 12, one aspect I've not seen addressed so much is the music. Probably because half of those throwing their bile over these series are only capable of thinking on a very shallow surface level, and Aknola's music has a little too much depth and subtlety for their simple minds to even pick up on. But Verdana recently made a couple of videos tracking the perceived decline in quality through the Moffat and Chibnall eras of Doctor Who. Some of his criticism is on point, then at other times he has these complete lapses in logic.
Part of what made the Doctor so interesting was the mystery surrounding their origin, and the fact that they were just a rebellious Time Lord who decided to rebel. Nothing less, and nothing more.
Wait, so you want the Doctor's origin to be mysterious, but then you also want her to just be another plain ordinary Time Lord from Gallifrey? Did you even proofread this script? Anyway, prior to all of that, he does actually bring up the score.
Then Gold left after Series 10, and what were we left with?
What do you think?
Ambient music that sounds like it was rejected from the Spore soundtrack.
Now, apart from deliberately misrepresenting Aknola's music by cherry-picking it to make out it all sounds the same, when in fact recurring motifs and thematic consistency are actually hallmarks of a good soundtrack, Verdana brings up how Moffat incorporated Clara's theme into the show itself in Hellbent as a sort of proof of how good it was, when ironically this moment perfectly embodies everything that had gone wrong with Murray Gold's score during his tenure as composer. Being a freelance musician myself, commissions open by the way, I feel I am uniquely qualified to talk about this, and the important distinction to make firstly is that a good piece of music does not necessarily equal a good score. A classic example of this by Murray Gold is his composition I Am the Doctor. There is a reason why it is so popular and well known among the fan base. It is the perfect blend of heroic and fairy tale that fits the Matt Smith era like a glove, and to top it all off it has this trippy 7/8 time signature which never lets you get comfortable for too long. It's a great composition, and yet as a theme for the Doctor I always rank it bottom of the list. See, the problem with I Am the Doctor is it's so heroic and attention grabbing you can basically stick it over anything and it's like a big flashing neon sign saying, hey look, something really badass is happening, as illustrated by this clip of Stu Bagful making a jam sandwich. Now, in one sense, the music is doing what a soundtrack is supposed to do here, manipulating the viewer's emotions. The trouble is, we are consciously aware of it happening, and once you're aware of it, it just doesn't have the same impact at all. And this is a recurring theme through all of Gold's compositions for the show. He writes very theatrically, almost like the ballet composers of the Romantic era, where their music has its own presence and narrative voice describing what's happening. You wouldn't even need to be watching an episode to know the Cybermen or the Daleks are appearing, or that Rose is in this scene, and honestly, this approach isn't necessarily always a bad thing. I'll be the first to admit I adore that moment from Dark Water, but with this style of composing you always run the danger of creating a score which is very superficial. It's like the musical equivalent of Show Don't Tell, where instead of having any deep emotional impact, Gold's music just flat out tells us what is happening and how we should feel about it, without any subtlety. You want an example of what I mean by subtlety? I won't risk playing it, what with YouTube's copyright system, but the ending speech from Orphan 55 as one of my favourite accompaniments from the entire show. Seriously, go listen to it. It's so good it almost makes me want to forgive how on the nose the speech itself is. It's ominous and moody, but the real genius is in its understated simplicity, and the fact you probably wouldn't even notice it was there without being aware of it. Oh, and if you're about to argue that it's still just generic ambient background music which isn't tailored to the show in any specific way, there's another example of Aknola's work which addresses that. Starting Starting in Spyfall when the Doctor looks across at destroyed Gallifrey and recurring again as the arc progresses to the finale, you'll hear these musically distorted, detuned renditions of the 13th Doctor's theme tune. From a thematic point of view, this makes complete sense as the arc is all about the Doctor losing her identity and questioning who she is, what lives she might have lived before her memory was wiped. But the music alone doesn't give you the full picture. You still need the contextual information for everything to fit into place, and that's how a soundtrack should be done, complementing what's on screen without stealing the show. I don't hate Murray Gold or his music. As I said, there are times when his more theatrical approach works well enough, and it kind of suits the overblown melodrama of the Russell T Davies era. But don't go thinking just because you remember it that automatically makes it superior. Segun Akinola chooses to handle the Doctor Who soundtrack quite differently, and ultimately his approach is effective too, in its own way. I'm Midnight, and I just lost my train of thought.